Well, hello, educator friends, and welcome back to another episode of the School Life series. So, on our last episode, we had the incredible Dr. Todd Smith coming to us from sunny Southern California. And I always love my time with Todd. He's just a great guy who is all in for students, for his teachers, and the community that he serves. So, if you haven't gave that episode a listen, go back and listen to it. But speaking of all in, this guy right here that we have with us today, my next guest, is pretty special because he is my first Indiana guest. I am from Indiana, and so is Drew. So, Drew is an assistant principal right here in the northern part of our state. I'm more centrally located, but we have some common connections, and you all have your first dose of Indiana boys taking over the School Life series. So, Drew, thanks for taking the time to come on and be a guest today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Ross. And I feel really special now being your first Indiana guest.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't set the bar too low or too high for other great Indiana leaders or educators that are going to be on here. But I
Yeah.
just like to put a plug in. I thoroughly enjoy listening to this podcast. I have a 45-minute commute in the morning and then 45-minute commute in the afternoon. And you, along with the interview chair and a couple other great podcasts I like to listen to. So thank you for
Awesome.
providing this platform for leaders and educators.
Thanks, Drew. That means a lot. And I'm glad that you get that time. And that's exactly my mission with this is just to provide, short bits, 30, 35 minutes for the commute or the prep period for teachers or whatever it may be. And where you can just, get better, both personally and professionally. So let's start there. Tell us about who you are personally. How would you describe yourself in a nutshell?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anytime you get this question in a interview process, it's hard not to jump right to, well, I'm currently serving this. And,
Yep.
when you talk about personally, I see a lot of my identity through my family. I come from a family of teachers and educators, and I'll share with you more about my story that way. But I see myself as a father to two amazing kids, Xander, who is 4, and Blake is 2. So they keep me on my toes and keep me busy.
Yeah.
Married to my best friend, Jess. We were high school sweethearts. She's the yin to my yang, and she's also a third grade elementary teacher. So we come from a family of teachers that way. On a personal level, I like to consider myself an avid reader. I love to read. I love books. The evolution of my reading life, I would say, since high school and college has molded differently. Between teaching elementary and middle school to where I'm at now. Whenever I get a free time in my moment and I'm not hanging out with my wife or my kids, I'm usually nose deep in a book. So I love to read. I love to develop myself that way. I read pretty widely. My love language to people is often book recommendations,
Okay.
or I'll ask for book recommendations. But I would say another part of my personal development and who I am, I have a really strong passion for coaching, working with youth. I would say in the sport of wrestling, I was a wrestling coach at the high school level, but started in that sport since I was 5 years old, and all the way up through my 30s, I was either coaching or wrestling myself. So I have a strong passion for coaching, working with people, um, having pleasure and not having all the right answers, but at least searching for them and working with people and serving people. So that coaching background, it's funny, on my days as an assistant principal, I have to remember that I'm an assistant principal, not a wrestling coach. So, which is huge, but
Yeah.
just that's a little bit just kind of about me and who I am.
Yeah. No, that's
So
great. Thanks for sharing and opening up a little bit. And one thing I always say on this podcast is that we have great people on here. Great educators, but just generally great people. And I know just by hearing a couple of minutes of you talking, I know that already, but our listeners are going to be able to tell. And that reading, man, I've got little kids too, you know that, and it gets harder and harder to find time to read sometimes. To having young ones, it's like, wow. By the time they're down to bed and everything's cleaned up, I'm struggling to keep my eyes open some nights, but I want to read for 15 or 20 minutes. So you got to be intentional about it. Drew, you talked a little bit already, said you'd open up some more about it, but tell us about your journey as an educator. Where did you start? Where have you been? Where are you going?
Yeah, I would say that I was kind of predestined to become an educator.
Okay.
My mom, currently still serving as a teacher, has been a second grade teacher for over 30 years. And again, come from a family of teachers. I feel really bad for my brother and my dad, who are really the only non-teachers in the family. When we have Christmas or family reunions, between myself and my mom and my sisters and my aunts, who are all teachers, it's a lot of education talk at Christmas time. So
That's what I was just
it's
wondering.
just
What does
a
Thanksgiving look like?
oh it's, you know what, I mean, it's funny because everyone, likes to share their stories in the classroom, which is great. I would say ever since coming over to the dark side of administration,
Yeah.
it's been interesting too, just that dynamic. But I just have a great support system of family members who are in the craft too. They're in the trenches of
Yep.
working with kids, and my mom is still teaching in Elkhart Community Schools, and I was born in Middlebury, went through Middlebury Community Schools. But on days that Middlebury would have snow days or cancellations, like, oh, I get to stay home and for snow
Yeah.
day. Well, oftentimes Elkhart was still in school, and in the 90s, it was okay or appropriate to have your kids come to work with you.
Yeah.
So on my days off of school, I was still in a school. And I think having those experiences going into my mom's classroom, watching her teach, watching her love on kids, was something that I knew I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah.
As I kind of went up through high school and even into college, I actually entered, the field of education, thinking that I wanted to teach history. Um, and by accident, in my first progressive charter school in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. And it was
Oh,
an accident, but when I showed up, they're like, hey, we don't care. We need you. And they put me in a mixed second and third grade classroom, Mrs. Scarborough's class. And I was like, I'm not even supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be in a high school doing history. Well,
mhm.
that experience of the mistake made my mom really happy, because within the next couple of weeks, I changed my study to elementary education, because working with that age group
Yeah.
was super rewarding. So that's been kind of my journey into choosing education. And I would say it's been a great venture, between the classroom and then coming into administration as well. So
Yeah. Cool. Well, and that was going to be one of my next questions. What led you into administration?
yeah, I would say a big part of coming into administration, between teaching in a variety of different settings back in my home district, because I came back to Middlebury to teach. I taught
Okay.
second grade, fifth grade, sixth grade language arts. I was a reading interventionist. I was starting to expand a variety of different roles, not on purpose, but just out of curiosity. I had a mentor who saw something in me that I didn't quite see in myself, and had called me and said, "Hey, I think it would be great for you to maybe start looking into becoming, just not only a teacher leader within a building, but potentially looking into leadership that way." And at
Yeah.
first, I was like, "Absolutely not." I love I love being in the classroom. I,
Yeah.
I love the direct impact, the relationship building, and the trenches I could have with kids. But the mentor I had, his name's John Levan. He's principal at Elkhart Community Schools. Said, yes, that impact that you thrive on and enjoy in the classroom
Mhm.
can be a little bit more indirect, a little bit more broader at a school level, um, to where, like, people who go into administration, oftentimes they miss the classroom, and I still do to this day. But it all came down to wanting to have a greater impact
Yep.
on students, even a grander impact on staff members who directly impact our students. So
Right.
just that wanting to serve and have impact is what's launched me into wanting to pursue administration. I would say to this day, that's what continues to keep me hungry and keep me here, in leadership. So
Yeah. That's a great answer. I love that. I could really resonate to that as well. I felt the same thing in my journey. As I started teaching fifth and sixth grade, I was like, wow, I'm making a greater impact. And, just led me into administration where you when you're doing it right and you can see the impact and feel the impact, it's pretty special. It's a pretty special feeling, and honestly, it led me to this position where I am now, because I know, getting to have an impact on the schools that I go and visit and work with on a daily, weekly basis around the country. Um, Getting to hear that and maybe not see it every day, but just know that it's happening is really rewarding and special, and it's why we're educators, right? So let's talk more about your current position. So you're an assistant principal, right, in an elementary setting, and but previously you were a principal in the middle school. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. It was a short tenured principal position
Okay.
in Richmond, Indiana. But
Okay.
even before then, I was an assistant principal and an athletic director in a middle school, uh,
Okay.
which I was very busy.
Yeah.
That's a very busy gig. It's very rewarding in a sense, because I did have previous teaching experience in a middle school, but
Yeah.
serving in that middle school role that way and athletic directing, I had my coaching background, I think that helped me as well. But coming back into an elementary building where I majority of my time as a teacher was spent, it's like kind of coming back to your niche, coming back to
Yeah.
where you're comfortable, coming back to where you feel like you're able to better serve people and help that way and still learn because no one's got all the answers.
That's for sure. Yeah, no,
So
I love that, and no kidding. In Indiana, it's common at a lot of smaller schools for high school assistant principals to be athletic directors as well. And
mhm.
I just don't know how they do it. There's only so many hours in the day, and both of those positions usually have a lot on their plate. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can only imagine the same way at the middle school setting. But Drew, we followed each other on social media for several years, and I got a pretty good idea just by following you, what the answer to this question is. But go ahead and tell our listeners, um, how would you describe the type of leader that you are?
Well, leadership is such an interesting concept. It's one of the most written books. I mean, the types of books I like to read, like when people talk about like what is true leadership, what does a leader do. I have a firm belief that the leadership. I believe people have the capacity to be leaders. Maybe not the stand on the table and energize the whole room and be enthusiastic leadership, but I think everyone has the capacity to demonstrate leadership, and that's something that I try to instill in the people that I lead with, and I would say even serve with. But my leadership philosophy as a leader is I have the responsibility to make sure that I am at my best, and on days when I'm not at my best, to be able to lean on others and other leaders is huge. I always talked about as a teacher, I was very much in the trenches. As a teacher, it was a continuing philosophy I wanted to have as a leader, as a principal, was being in the trenches, not losing sight of the classroom, not losing sight of the having empathy for what teachers go through each day,
Yeah.
what our students go through each day, and wanting to be just super involved. And I think there are times when the double-edged sword of that is, when you're in the trenches day in, day out in classrooms, in the lunchrooms, you're attending to conflict, to crisis, and knowing what systems need to be built that you can rely on that help with conflict, but then also not getting to that point where you're micromanaging and you can become more of a macro level
Yeah.
manager. So I try to, with my presence, be an in the trenches leader who's building capacity with people, building credibility with students and staff. I like to be in it. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not a hands off kind of leader. So,
Mhm.
and for some people that's different, and for other people they appreciate it because they know, hey, this person wants to come alongside and not just work, but work with us is huge.
Yeah. No, and you're absolutely right. And that type of leadership is not for everybody. You're right, but I think it's so important that, um, in the school setting, in educational leadership, that our principals, assistant principals, have to have that to some degree, right? We have to be willing to push up our sleeves, get our hands dirty, wipe down a cafeteria table,
Hmm.
sub in a classroom, because we can't lose sight, like you said, we can't lose sight of what our work really is, right? It's for kids, it's supporting our teachers and doing the right thing. And if we're not doing that, then it's easy I just talked recently on one of our episodes about, that to-do list piles up,
Hmm.
and we can stay in our office and keep checking it off every single day. And but are we truly connected and serving those in our buildings if we're doing that? And so you're doing it right, man, and it's not easy. So kudos to you, because that is a line that's hard to walk sometimes. Am I too in? Am I not getting my stuff done? And you're definitely working at it and doing it right. So thank you. Um, we're going to continue on, and I love this next question, and it's different for everybody. But who has influenced you in your life? It can be personally and professionally, same person, two different people in those two buckets. But who's had a big impact on you?
Yeah. Um, I would say, I've had a slew of people who I can say that have breathed amazing things into me, invested into me. I know I don't oftentimes like the word investment because it makes you think of business or some sort of transaction. But as far as I would say individuals who have influenced me the most, I I would have to probably say my mother, my mom. Again, being an educator, the legacy that she has left to me, she continues to leave for me as somebody that I can always depend on, somebody who loves me unconditionally, that will listen to me vent. It's important to have that, and I see my mom as someone. Obviously, it's your mom, but I see my mom as somebody I would consider one of my best friends because, just she raised me. She, you know what I mean? She
Yeah.
spent so much time with me, and she continues to breathe that life into me. So I wouldn't be the person I am today without my mom. Obviously, if my dad's listening to this, I love my dad too.
Love you too,
Um,
Dad.
yeah, I would say, even for my dad, my dad was self-employed for a number of years, and I learned a lot from him too. Whatever OCD tendencies I picked up from my mom, I got it very much from my dad too. But I
Yeah.
would say with my father, a big thing that he often would do in his own line of work is he would have this saying, it's stuck with me today. And it kind of is a filter I go through even as a leader, even as a father, is if it's worth doing right. And
Hmm.
I think that's huge. And for somebody who oftentimes worries about being a perfectionist, I know that that can be a barrier to some of the work, some of the social emotional care that I need to provide myself. But,
Yeah.
I'm all about doing things right, doing things the best that I can do, and having grace for myself. But I would say my parents have been a huge, huge, huge influence in my life, whether they're teachers or they're a floor installer. So it's
Yeah.
hard not to give them some love and appreciation that way.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. Love that. And yeah, you're right. I'm one of those people just like you. And actually my last episode with Todd Smith, we talked about that. I have that same philosophy in life. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it really, really well. I'm gonna be the best at it that I can possibly be, maybe the best out there at it. And that's just how I was raised as well, and my philosophy in life. But as a building leader, as a school leader, that can be tough because there are a lot of things that you have to do. And so my advice to our listeners is to try to simplify what you're doing. And instead of taking 30 things that are on your plate and you're trying to be great at all of those, so I'm going to focus on 5 or 6 or 7 this year, this season, and I'll be great at those because it's impossible to do everything great in that leadership role. And if you want to do it really well, hire people around you that are good at everything you're not good at, and
absolutely.
and then you can really see things take off. So, all right, next question, Drew. I like this one. What has been a game changer or a hack for you in your school life, either when you're teaching or now, and the leadership role? What is something you said once I figured that out, sky's the limit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have two, and
Okay.
they're on the simple side, but they're things that I've started just in the last 2 years. Because as a school leader, especially a newer school leader, trying to manage the load of work, the sheer work that goes on throughout the day. Oftentimes, as a school administrator, your day isn't just from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
There are things that oftentimes that don't get done during the school day. And I found myself oftentimes in my first couple of years beating myself, up for, prioritizing present time during the school day to kids and staff, and then just saving all the things that
Mhm.
could be worked on later or at home or after school or before school, which I do because the work doesn't go away. It still needs to be
It's still
filled.
there.
But being more intentional with how I schedule days or times within my day to get work done. So I started scheduling a meeting with myself twice a week for 30 minutes to check in with myself, to check in with my goals for the week. Oftentimes, the last thing I like to do is to shut my office door and work and have this meeting. But I found that in the course of a week, when I have that intentional hour of time that I gift myself, I find myself using less time outside of school, helps give
Yep.
me clarity. So having that kind of that twice a week scheduled meeting with myself was a
Yep.
little weird at the beginning, but it's helped me so much with my work habits, with my efficiency, with my focus. It's just been a really great hack for me.
I
So,
love that one. I'm sorry not to interrupt you, but I love that. I was really big on intentionality and scheduling the day and all that, but I love the taking a 30-minute meeting with yourself. That's great. So that hopefully our listeners take that one, write it down,
yeah.
and use it.
Yeah.
What other one,
My
Joe?
my last one, I would say this has been newer too, but I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with the 2x10 strategy that
Yeah.
some teachers will use to just intentionally build time within the day to connect with a student of concern or a student that you really want to develop a relationship with. Is a great strategy, the 2x10. Well, I started using that 2x10 strategy with staff members, and
Yes.
so much staff members that I didn't oftentimes get to work with. I was very intentional this year about selecting a few number of staff members, not all of them because we have over 50 staff, but just staff members that I wanted to check in with, on a routine basis. What gets measured gets treasured, but I have like my own little playbook of people and who I checked in with on this day for a certain amount of time. I try to keep it to an intentional 2-minute interaction with staff members just to check in with them, see how life's going, how the classroom's going, or oftentimes not even talk about school.
Yep.
And it's been so beneficial because when I put it on my schedule and I put it as a time to, hey, I need to connect with this one fifth grade teacher. I haven't connected with them in over 2 weeks. It's huge. So building in any time to be really intentional and targeted towards staff members is huge. And I think it's helped me in my relationships with people I've worked with, but then
Mhm.
just also like my communication skills. And I think it's been a really big game changer for me. Because it's also just made me think of how else am I spending my time if I'm always with kids at lunch or at recess, or I'm putting out a fire here. What intentional time am I setting for the people that I'm leading with and I'm serving, which would be your classroom teachers and staff? So,
Yeah, that's great. I've utilized the 2x10, definitely heard of it, but never with staff. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And
absolutely.
there's nothing cheesy about coming back and having a spreadsheet and marking it off because your day gets crazy, life gets crazy, and like you said, it may have been 2 months since I've really made an effort to connect with this staff member, but it doesn't feel like it. I don't know that. And so I can look at my spreadsheet and I can say, man, I got to get down to room 51 because I haven't talked to them, in 2 months,
Hmm.
one on one, or just checked on them or anything like that. And another thing I used to do, it was take a little notes when I got back. So their child just had this going on. And so next time I go down there, I can follow up, right? And see what's going on. So that's great stuff. Well, Joe, you've already shared two great pieces of advice, but this next section of the episode is what I call the open floor. So just a few minutes where you can share your expertise, whatever you want to share to our listeners in your area of expertise. Take a few minutes and fill us up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I have three things to talk about, and I'm not going to go into
Okay.
great depth on them, but sharing things and then having dialogue with you is more important. So, I think I talked about and hinted to it earlier, but like our presence as leaders or educators is so important. In a previous episode with Dr. Tyler Cook, he had talked about that people first mindset, and I just can't. I can't highlight enough just how important it is, the work that we do, and how important relationship building is, but then just the intentionality of getting out there, being in the trenches with kids. You'll never regret it, because that's why we went into this field of education, is to make an impact. And it's really truly hard to make impact when you aren't present and you're not in the trenches, building relationships, sustaining relationships, building credibility with your staff, with your students. It oftentimes too, if you are an assistant principal in a building, it also is very effective and efficient for keeping down discipline discipline trends that way, of being
Yeah.
active, being visible, being available that way. So one of the things I do to help me with my visibility out there is I have a mobile desk that I'll cart around throughout the building. It's not a really big building, but I'll if I have managerial stuff I need to work, I'm gonna hop on my mobile desk and go out and about and be in the hallways saying hi to kids. Going to lunch, visiting that way, providing supervision that way. And again, there's low hanging fruit, but just that visibility piece is huge for anybody who wants to lead and be available that way for staff is
Hey,
huge.
nothing against your support staff or anything like that. But the moment you walk into the cafeteria, the tone changes, right?
Hmm. Absolutely.
Just your presence alone in the cafeteria is going to change the atmosphere. Is going to take the level from a 20 to a 10. And
Hmm.
so never underestimate the value of just being present. That's great.
Absolutely.
All right. What else
Yeah,
you got?
the and I'm glad you brought up support staff. I would say coming here to Churubusco Elementary School, I was very blessed to find out that part of my role would be supervising our instructional support staff, which is our instructional assistants. We have over 15 staff members, instructional assistants in our building, and when I had found this out, I previously, really working with classroom teachers, I'd have very minimal interactions with working with support staff in that supervisory role. But these last 2 years have been phenomenal, because the capacity building and leadership that you bring as a leader is not only for your teachers. When we talk about instructional support staff, they're underpaid, sometimes underappreciated, and I would often say even underestimated.
Yeah.
These
Oh,
people who
100%.
come in daily to work with our kids, to work and support our teachers is phenomenal. And I built some intentional meetings and some professional development platform for these amazing individuals, where once a month we're meeting to talk about things that are going on in the school, to bring these important staff members up to speed with school improvement processes, things that are going on, soliciting their feedback, but then just having some book study time to study engagement strategies, to study how to manage a small group of students that they're being asked to work within the classroom or even like out in the hallway, has just been huge. And I
Yep.
would say one of the most valuable pieces of investing this time in our support staff is the impact it's had on our culture, the impact it's had on these staff members feeling a sense of belonging, which is a huge need for anybody in any workplace.
Yep.
But just like I said, I think the underestimated X factor of these instructional support staff who just enhance the education of our students and really support our teachers is huge.
Yeah.
So making sure
Man.
you're building the capacity of everyone in that building.
Yep, 100%. I could go on just like you are now, but on and on about this, because I think if you can do this, it'll change the game for your school. I did the same thing when I was a principal. Told our district leadership that, hey, I'm going to invest in our paraprofessionals, our instructional leaders, and I got some feedback at first. They're, oh, the turnover is super high. Um, you know, I don't know if that's a good idea, and I said, absolutely not. And because they are professionals. A lot of times we put our toughest students with them, but we don't train them. We don't provide them any guidance. We don't treat them like professionals. and it sets a recipe for disaster. So when, just like you started treating them like professionals, started involving them in whole staff meetings, providing them with materials and time to get better and learn. Not only did their work improve, but they, like you said, they felt a sense of belonging. The culture of our entire school improved, and guess what? The retention improved. And these staff members, they didn't leave every year, every other year. They stuck around because they felt valued now, and they didn't care how much they were getting paid. They knew the impact and the difference they were making with kids, and so yeah, I'm passionate about it too, and I could go on,
Yeah.
but sorry to interrupt you. What else you got as far
Okay.
as advice here?
My last one, I would say, in the last 2 years, I talked about like loving reading. I have happened on an excellent educator leader out of New York. His name is Larry Dake. He's a superintendent out of New York. Just about school leadership and the importance of leaders having habits. He actually co-wrote a book with a couple other leaders out in New York. It's the name of the book is Dads, Leaders, and Father Figures, and it's a collection of just short stories from these three gentlemen who wrote this book. But one of the chapters in this book was talking about having balance about your balance. And Dr. Dake, talks a lot about how as school leaders, trying to pursue this work-life balance mix, it is sometimes really difficult to do because in an administrative role, there's an ebb and flow between time commitments, and it's hard for us to have a great work-life balance. And that chapter in that book, it talks about, being very intentional with your time as a father, because, as a school leader, you are something to the people at work, but then you're also the world to people at home. And
Yes.
knowing how to work with your family and to balance about that balance. But just even being more intentional with the time that you are going to have with your family is huge. And I've really kind of leaned in to that this year and saying, hey, do I really need to bring my computer home tonight? Do I really need to
Yeah.
work on the notes from that case conference at the end of the day that I didn't finish up and put into IIP, or do I need to work on that grant report that's due on Friday and it's Tuesday? So I think it's just huge that we as leaders strike and find that balance that's going to work, and that we become just really intentional about our life, even outside of where we serve in the classroom and the building. That way is huge.
Yep. I love that. And I couldn't agree more, Drew. I mean, it's so important. You said it best. You are the world to those people that you go home to. And so we don't want to blink and one day they'll be gone, right?
Yeah.
You'll say, man, I wish I had those years back. Should have
Hmm.
been home a little more. So love the advice. Thank you for taking the time in the open floor to share those insights. And I would say you're an expert at them. I know you say, I can always improve, and we all can, but you're doing a really good job at that and all those things that you gave. So thank you for doing that. All right. We're over
Absolutely.
time, which
Thank you.
is all good. But I want to ask you one last question, because I like this. I'm all in for kids. I love my time with students. And what advice do you give your students at your school?
I don't know if I heard your question then, Ross. Can you
Sorry.
ask it again?
Yeah, it's all
You're
right.
okay.
I'll cut that out. So my last question for you, Drew, before we close this out. I love students. I'm all in for students. Love my time for students, and obviously the impact that we can have on students. But what advice do you give to your students if they say, "Mr. Graver always tells us this"? What is that one thing?
Well, I oftentimes with students that I work with, I really communicate with them. I talk a lot about being the difference and what being the difference truly means. And it's not just some cute character building mindset of, hey, I'm going to make a difference. But I talk a lot about students, being leaders, students being difference makers, really just instilling in our students that, as life goes on, you are a decision maker and what you do matters. I'm a huge Superman fan, and
Okay.
I oftentimes will talk about Superman stories, so my kids will roll their eyes, oh, Mr. Graver's Superman story. But there's there's a scene in one of the recent movies, I think it was probably 10 years ago, where Superman was having an issue with some other students his age. They were kind of picking on him, and he got really upset, was grabbing a fence and like crushed the fence, but did not have the self-control not to strike them. And after those kids left, his dad came up to him, because Superman has a dad, earthly dad, and just says, I know you were really upset there. And Superman goes, I just wanted to hit them. And the dad goes, well, you're going to be different, Clark, because you're, as you get older, you're going to have to make a decision about what kind of person you're going to be, because whoever that person is, they're going to change the world. And I really communicate that with my students oftentimes, that you are going to be a difference maker, not only for yourself, but others. And what are you doing now to make that impact on yourself and others? So that's a sounding board that I'm pretty redundant with our students and our staff. So that being a
Love that.
difference maker.
Be the difference. I love that. Well, hey man, we are out of time, and this was a good episode. Thank you for all the knowledge that you shared, insights, and just sharing about your personal life and your journey as an educator as well. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know our listeners will as well. So, anything else you got for us, Drew, as we sign off?
I do not, Ross. I appreciate your time and energy that you put in again to this platform, building the capacity for educators, teachers, leaders. I just think it's been a true blessing being able to connect not only in this experience, but then continuing to follow along. I love your leadership story, your journey that way, and I think you went into where you're at now is to continue to make impact, and I think you're making a pretty direct and indirect impact on many people. So thank you, Ross.
Well, thanks, Drew. I really appreciate that. That was not scripted, by the way, anybody. So thanks, Drew. All right, hey, that's all we got. Until next episode, I always say be great today, but you know what? I want to end with something different. Be the difference.